You admit you're wrong then, right there? Like you did not define the question properly
No, it's the
for what
same.
ministry leaders say.
Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm here with Kenny Jahng, longtime friend of mine, personally longtime friend of Media Impact International, very active in the digital ministry space. You are a convener of people and conversations, a consultant to ministries. You do a lot of this work
Oh,
yourself.
you're being so nice to me. Are you going to ask
A
me for
true
a favor?
expert.
I'm not used to all this flowery language.
No, I'm giving people the intro. This is going to be like the roughest lead into one of these episodes that we've done yet, but we're already in the middle of the conversation. Just as I was trying to tell you before, the official start, what we're going to talk about. Like this is what I want to talk about, because the question I literally got yesterday was, is there a cheaper option? It wasn't free, but the difference between what they were paying and free is only $400 a month. The top level is $400 a month for this service. I was like, what, you want to cut it down to 100? Like, this tool is doing the work that it would take 3 people to do full time. And we're not willing to pay $400 a month for
it's
it.
the expense mentality, right? They're not framing it the proper way. For some reason, technology is, relegated to the expense column, not the investment column.
This MarTech stack, marketing technology stack of tools, I want ministry leaders to understand what this looks like in the quote unquote real world, but also, like, how do we shift the conversation from the expense column to return on investment to, opportunity costs? And you are one of the best in the biz with understanding like what tools are available and what they do and how they can accelerate, like, your team, provide hyper performance for your team, and at such an incredibly low cost. Like, the crazy thing about software is it only gets cheaper over time. It might be really expensive to start, but then, the only way for software producers to maintain that high subscription rate, in most cases, SaaS softwares, like software subscriptions, is to continually add features and innovate forward and with product development. So that should like keep the price up for the producer. It keeps the expense high for the ministry, but the value is astronomical today for a lot of these tools compared to what we used to pay for and what we used to have to hire teams to do. So, do people understand this, Kenny? Like, is there a proper, perspective or view of the world?
Look,
for most of the
I would
ministry
say,
leaders that you're working with?
that's the burden I have. And I feel like my call as I've crossed over from marketplace to ministry is, how do we actually educate, bring awareness to convince these leaders that you're talking about, that there's so much more available on the other side of the road. You just need to cross that road and see it. It's almost like, I was with our dog this morning, and we were going to take her to the park, right? So the park, she's going to have free reign and running like crazy, but she didn't want to get in the car. She wanted to go to a corner in our front yard, and that's it. And so she only knows that domain, doesn't understand how amazing it is if you just take that leap and get in the car and go with us, right? And I think my job is to figure out how to convince people to get in the car, because once we get in the car and go to the park, your playground is just so much more infinite versus what you have here now. And so, that's the work I'm doing with churchtechtoday.com right now. Like, our phrase right now is, we're going to help you identify and build the perfect tech stack for ministry, because people just don't understand. And I think that's one of those things where they don't teach you that in seminary, and it's hard to piece things together. And again, I think one of those things is, when you look at things as an expense, it's, I'm paying for MailChimp for email, I'm paying for this, I'm paying for, it's all separate. But if you start to look at workflows and how you piece things together and you're saying how it's replacing the tediousness that you have to do in certain activities that you traditionally would have done in ministry, then your perspective changed, right? You need to get that in your head, that this is not just, you're not just buying a gadget, you're buying a change of work philosophy.
Our,
Yeah.
I'm going to say marketing teams, because there's a marketing team within these ministries, but are marketing teams empowered to lead their
No.
organizations
I mean, marketing
forward in that way?
still in 2024 a bad word. So we
Yeah, it
call it
is.
church comms because we don't call it church marketing. I think fundamentally there is this pushback because it's a fear of, and then maybe it's a language thing, right? It's one of those things like, we don't want to ever be seen as a business. And so we don't want to use,
Or
yeah, we need to
schlepping
create new
gospel,
language
maybe.
in a way, right? You don't want to be confused, because and teaching on this AI stuff is it amplifies this dichotomy. They don't want to remove the humanity, the spiritual divine elements in ministry. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're
Sure.
actually using AI to amplify the humanity of ministry. It's I don't know. I come to you for answers all the time. What's the answer, Nick? That's why I always call you for advice and counsel and answers.
I think that, so I was in the marketplace. This podcast is not about me. Like, I don't talk about, we've got a great group of guests that join this conversation. But for those that don't know, like, I was in the marketplace. So I was leading marketing for .com that was on the Inc. 500 list 3 years in a row, one of the fastest growing companies in the country. And it was all through
Right.
paid advertising, Google AdWords and stuff like that. And in 2008, I left to go into ministry and apply those tools and processes and skills and all that stuff to digital ministry, digital evangelism. And that's where I got into like all the follow-up tools, because you have to, if you're reaching people, you have to provide follow-up. Did that for 12 years, and then I made a decision to go back into the marketplace. Like, I left that role for a number of reasons. People make career changes and move your family and all this stuff for a mix of personal and professional reasons. That was true for us as well.
Mhm.
But I'm still involved, and because I love it, and it's a passion, and there's so many people that you and I both know that are doing great work that I just want to try to continue to support. But one of the big motivators for me going back into the marketplace was, I saw, after 12 years in ministry, I saw my skills, my knowledge, my perspective, my relational
Yeah,
networks
I
were
can see that.
degrading, because the marketplace is moving so much faster than ministries tend to. And that's fairly obvious and probably should be the case, because there's, like, this historical, theological context. Like, we need to treat, tradition and kind of the fullness of church history and
Yeah.
theology carefully. You don't want to change those things too quickly. But when it comes to,
Yeah.
technology advancing, it's it's happening so fast in the marketplace. And what I see is a lack of conversation about those tools, but not just the tools. It's like the application, the strategy, kind of the camaraderie among teams that are, working on this stuff. So this last software company that I led as the CEO, like I mentioned earlier, 300 employees. Like, this is a big company. We're selling into the Fortune 100 companies. And you would have like Microsoft, Google, AWS, Salesforce, HubSpot, like all of these people, CMOs from these companies from the outside, you'd say, oh, these are all competing. They're competitors. But you would get them around a dinner table in, someplace in the country at some conference,
Yeah.
and people are very open about their challenges, sharing wins, sharing losses, sharing details about what tools they're using, sharing details about contracts, like what are you buying that for? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
very open,
Yes.
collaborative environment under the surface. And I think we need more of that. And hopefully with that type of conversation, this thought about marketing being kind of relegated to the corner, I think changes, because we all want to use these tools to try to reach more people, but we're not giving the people that know the most about those tools kind of a seat at the table. And that's one of the things that motivated me to really start this conversation with people like you, is to let's try to elevate that. And again, I think you are a convener. Like, you're, I think, one of the best people I know at
But
pulling
I
that
think that
conversation
that
together.
trait, I mean, we share
So,
similar backgrounds. You're at marketplace and the ministry, and then I feel like,
mm,
especially in tech and innovation, it moves so fast. Right. When I was a partner in the .com incubator, the venture catalyst, we would measure innovation in dog years. In a single calendar year, you would have 7 leapfrogs of innovation that you have to continuously catch up with or get left behind. And when, yeah,
that's like
yeah.
two a quarter,
And in the
by the way.
AI world right now that I'm living in, for AI for churchleaders.com, our community, you're getting that sense. People are getting some FOMO because they're like, if I don't log into our Facebook group for a day, it feels like there's so much happened that they're lost. And I'm like, no, 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 calm down, get a handle on life. But I think, honestly, when you're in an innovation front, right? Even AI, the last quarter, over 1,000 AI specific apps have been launched to the world in the last quarter alone. There's no way you and I, if we're full time in that industry, that we can know everything that's going on. The only way to get ahead is to understand hashtag better together, and that you need to be collaborative. You need to have the relationships. You must have a network. The one who has the widest network wins, because generosity is the thing that fuels progress. And in terms of sharing, and exactly what you said at the dinner table, everyone's hungry to be able to learn, and the only way to learn is it's a reciprocity, right? You need to give up something in order to get something, and that's where we learn together. Anyway, that is what has fueled me in terms of the relationship building, etc. I think you have the same ethos, and why we get along so well is because we privilege that. Now, a local church, if you want to be reductionistic and be, have a dim view of churches in this country, so many times there are churches on the same street, if not the same zip code, and the pastors and the church leadership don't talk to each other. I've always found it weird, where it's like, we have the Super Bowl of the church, whether it's Easter or Christmas or these things, and everyone has their own version of things. Why have Easter egg
Mm.
hunts that are different? You're competing. It's almost like you have your own pop-up shop in different brands, and you want to come to my Easter egg hunt versus your Easter egg hunt. And there are many things that we could do all collaboratively. Like, as a non-Christian, someone who doesn't go to church, they look at the church proper as a whole as y'all Christians. If the one time I'm going to be Southern is that, right? Like, y'all over there, you Christians over there, right? Like, they treat us all as one monolith, and yet we don't act with that unity and unison. And I feel like that's missing in many, it's not all, but many pockets of church leadership cultures. We're all silent, right? That is the default posture, that we don't actually talk to each other down the street. I
Well,
think part of it is the nature of our business. The church is a 7-day production cycle. It's very hard. I think, if in nonprofits and marketplace businesses, it's much easier. When you have a 7-day production cycle, and at Monday it resets, and you must do the whole thing again, brand new, you're not recycling content, you're going off and creating new things. I think it's hard. You're in this hamster wheel. that I think it's hard to make space to breathe, to actually then look out, because you're on, right? You have that pressure. I think that's one of the drivers. I don't know. What do you think?
Hmm. I think it has something to do with that for sure. I mean, there's some good things about a 7-day production cycle. For example, some of these church teams are incredible at what they're
I've always
churning
said,
out on a weekly
why
basis.
isn't
I mean,
the
video.
local businesses coming to ask to take tours and learn from the church teams? Because some of the what churches do is incredible. What they pump out on a 7-day, or um, Zuckerberg, right, was studying the church for many reasons and visited many churches personally, because he said, in terms of
Right.
community developments, right, that the church is one of the few organizations or organisms or structures that have one to many, one to mid-size, one to one, right? Has all these different dynamics of community engagement, and yet at the same time, we also,
Mm-hmm.
on the production side, we in North America, the last several decades, churches and ministries have all been about excellence of delivery, right? Not the messiness of church
Mm-hmm.
planting, but
Mm-hmm.
excellence and excellence. There's so much that our local neighbors, our business people, can learn from what we're doing in the church, right? How do we recapture that respect and authority in different ways? Not just about knowledge of the book, but of all these other things, and then start to share what we learned with other neighbors. I don't know. I think there's such a huge opportunity for us as leaders in our communities to build those networks and relationships.
That's what I was going to say too. I mean, if you're a pastor listening to this conversation, like, their opportunity is the word. I mean, that's the takeaway here, is that it requires leadership and somebody
Yes.
to really be a convener on the local level. And I think that, a lot of the tools that we deal with, and, you and I both work with different ministries, are reaching,
Yes. Yes.
regionally or even globally. Like, there's this huge reach, but ministry
Yes.
happens at a hyper local level. And, like, the hyper local level is owned by the local church. It's like that model
Hmm.
is ancient. It hasn't changed. It's still discipleship in the context of relationship. It's and relationships are built between people on a local level. So moving from, online to offline is one way that we've talked about it, but I'd say also moving from, like, global or national to local is, I think, the way that we need to be thinking about this. But if you go from the bottom up, like, that's the opportunity for the local pastor,
Yes.
is to gather together that people and give your single video guy who's doing the shooting and the editing and the full production cycle, every 7 days, give him a seat at the table, let him speak into this, let him, share best practices. And I'm hosting a mission trip for our
Where are you
youth
going?
group this summer, and we're going to South America. I don't really want to say, specifically, but we're going down there to support and kind of help, really just support this team that's doing a great work, doing
Hmm.
really kind of community development in this country in South America, to help shift people's mindset from a
Hmm.
poverty mindset to an abundance mindset. And it starts with a mindset shift. It's like, you are not destined to be impoverished. There's a lot of control that community leaders can take. So this ministry has a very interesting, um, we're working with Food for the Hungry, which, they're all over the place. And what I've learned about this, and my church asked me to kind of vet and evaluate this ministry, as if it, to see if it's something that we want to support long term. But they'll go into a community and they'll say, okay, and it's like a 7-year program. They start, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years at the beginning, and they'll say, like, who are the leaders, who are the influencers, and it's kind of like this stakeholder roadmap. Who has influence in this community, who has power in this community. And it's not always like the mayor, or whatever the title would be for the person in charge. Sometimes it's like the elderly grandmother
Mm-hmm.
who
Yeah.
everybody listens
Yeah.
to. Everybody comes to her for advice or whatever. So they'll kind of understand what the dynamic is. They'll start to biblically present this message of really kind of power and abundance and kingdom building. It's like you were made to kind of step into a leadership role. You were made to cultivate human flourishing in your own community. And then they start to provide tools and programs that are specific to that community. Like, what do you need? What's the deficit? Where's the gap? So say it's a water source. Well, then they might bring in, somebody that can drill wells or something and provide clean water. But they don't go in and say, okay, we're a clean water ministry, or we're a food distribution, or we're this or that. They kind of understand what the real needs are, and then establish all of that with community leaders in a way that's sustainable and really like self-supporting. And then they move on. They leave that to these community leaders, and they go on and do it again at the next place. So one of the things I was talking about with our contact is like, we want to just provide, hands and feet to help you do the work. Like, we're not here to, lead in any way at all. We just want to kind of help support whatever you're doing. So why am I talking about this? I think that, in a place of relative abundance like the US or really any metropolitan area around the world, I don't think we often approach ministry from this sustainable, like community-led
Mm-hmm.
position. I think we kind of come in as saviors a lot, and say like, we're going to do all this work. Well, if I do all that work, that means, it kind of crumbles whenever I leave. And I think in the case of, the North American church or ministry leaders in that community, you can take that same kind of sustaining, equipping type of role in really any environment. And it's a mindset I would love to see, people latch onto and gather people around, because I think there's a lot of good work that can be done in that format. But to get us back into like the digital ministry stuff a little bit, I think that you said there's, it's an expense line. Let's talk about some of these tools just a bit more, because that landscape is moving so quickly. It's impossible to keep up with it yourself. So you have to have other people that are bringing their perspective and experience to the conversation. What is required for budget holders and decision makers to really shift from that expense line mentality to, this is an accelerator? Is it that the data isn't being presented in the right way? Or is there just maybe at a more basic level, a lack of understanding that this is providing kind of horsepower, or it's amplifying the work that we want to do? These tools are amplifying the work. I had this conversation with my brother the other day. He was like, do people not realize it, or do they not see it? Does that make sense? That took me, realize it, meaning, do they not think that that's what it's there for? These tools are just a
Yeah.
shiny
I
toy
don't
to
think.
play with, or do they not
I think it's
see the
both. I
value?
think the thing that leads is they just don't understand it. They don't understand. Like even Mailchimp. Let's talk about Mailchimp for
Mm-hmm.
email. Reason why it's gotten so much traction is because it answers the question that we started this whole conversation with: is it free? Like, what email tool can I use that's free? And Mailchimp smartly has a business model that the first couple thousand people on your email list, as long as it's under a certain number of thousand people, then it's totally free. And I think that's how they got into their churches are a large segment of their customer base. But MailChimp is not just for let's send out an email once a week. There's so many other things that you can do with MailChimp. Same thing with texting. Anyone who's adopting texting at the very beginning just thinks, oh, let's just send out mass texts, a blast, a group text, right? Just a big group text with a church. And yet, if you look at text in church or other tools, that there's all these workflows and sophistication and stuff that you can actually produce a really good guest follow-up system, workflows for reminders for your staff. There's all these things that you can do, but they just don't understand it. And I think that's you have to get beyond square one of education of what you can do with technology.
Something that I talked about all the time, and I was involved in conversations where I heard this all the time in the business world, was marketing ops, marketing operations. I've never heard anybody mention that in ministry. You know what I'm talking about?
Again, I think it's because they don't understand marketing. There's not very few churches have a marketing team before you get to maybe, I don't know, maybe 750 or 1,000 people. Right?
So at my last company,
which means it's the majority of churches in North America. Majority of churches in North America are way below 750 people gathering on a Sunday.
Sure. Yeah, but there's people in these congregations that do this, for a living.
Yes. Yes. Which gets down to, I think it's a self-imposed problem that church. So historically, churches were in the city center of the city square, right? It was the lifeblood of it was the hospitals, it was the schools. Like when you moved into a town, you go to the church first. Culture has removed this church from the center of the city, conceptually. But I think churches self opted out of becoming relevant to all these other things in the neighborhood, and relegated itself only to if it's related to the word, the book, or not. It's like, that's it. And there's no other choose your own adventure besides that. It's a very thin choose your own adventure book.
Yeah. And ironically, it's incredibly relevant, what the church is offering today. Are you in your community, in your hometown, do you have any of these Facebook groups that are like, Secret Town USA, where it's like you can ask the moderator questions anonymously, and people from the community that are part of that group can just answer in the comments? Have you seen this kind of stuff? Katie and I were talking about this a little bit.
I mean, there's several Facebook groups for a town, and people do ask anonymous questions all the time. So like our superintendent of the local school district resigned. And so someone anonymous, Facebook has that anonymous feature. And so someone asked that, and then tons of people have answered, right? So there's all these question and answers. Yes.
So some of the questions I've seen in our local group just over the last week, and I didn't plan this, I'm just going off the top of my head, so it's whatever's just recent. I've seen at least 3 questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes one question gets asked and then it prompts like a follow-on from somebody else. But there were 3 about divorce. It's like, hey, I'm looking for a divorce lawyer, or I'm considering a divorce, or who can I talk to about a divorce? There was one around tax time. Like, it's, we're recording this April 19th. So we just had tax day come through.
Yeah.
And there was like financial planning questions that came up. There was something about like summer camps, what are options for kids this summer?
Someone was asking for a therapist recently in my group.
Yeah, therapist. All of these are answered by the local church. I mean, my church is just one of many in our town, but we've got summer camps for kids. We've got like marriage counseling. We've got divorce support groups. Oh, another one was like alcohol addiction. Somebody was asking, like, what are the local resources for, overcoming alcohol addiction? Like, all of that stuff exists in the local church. And I feel like as I read through the comments, like there's an absence of representation, of people saying, hey, I want to,
I think
we have this service
it's two
available
ways though, right?
here.
Like, so some of the comment replies in those threads should say, "Hey, have you looked at XYZ church?" Right? Like that's what you're saying, and top of mind, etc. But on the other side too, our church, the congregation, has so many resources available where it doesn't have to be just about the church doing the actual solution, but the community itself has the ability to refer and to help and contribute and be a part of the solutions for all these things as well. And we're not tapping that. Again, I think it's because we've self-relegated ourselves that says, look, we're not tapping our community for anything that's related to XYZ, because all we do is, if it's not tied to the book, that's it.
Right. So kind of to tie a few of these ideas together, these tools, like social listening, you mentioned texting, you mentioned email, that's kind of outbound communication, but there's all kinds of social listening tools that would allow somebody in the church, whether it's a volunteer or a staff person, to kind of monitor and engage and participate in these conversations that are happening all around us.
In the previous church I worked in, our our digital team, so it was a multi-site with campus pastors. So we went to every campus pastor and said, can you give us a couple different lists? The top 50 people that are your volunteers, your high engaged people, leaders. And then give us the people of the new people in your community that just started attending, or just visitors, stuff that you want to pay attention to start to build those relationships. High capacity givers, and right, all these lists. People that the pastor wants to engage with, ideally. Audiences.
So audience segments.
And then what we did is we set up an assistant, a virtual assistant, to find all of their social profiles. And we used Hootsuite at the time, and Hootsuite has these columns for filters. And then we also had hashtags, and we asked the pastor, what are you interested in? So Nick, you like, hockey, and I like cooking, and someone likes outdoor nature and hiking. And so we would actually set up filters for each one in those audience lists. And if anyone actually posted anything about those topics and keywords, which Hootsuite helped you filter out, it would show up in those feeds. And then what our VA would do is we would take the direct links to those posts. So if you posted about life, faith, Jesus, our church, any of the life transition points like loss of job, new birth, vacation, anything like that, or if you like the Jets versus the Giants, like the sports teams, because you like to trash talk and have fun in the sports, or for me, cooking, or for the other person, hiking, then we would have the links, and twice a week we would send those links to the pastor, which is basically a manual social listening system, but it's easy to set up. And then they just need to click through and see if they can comment or engage on that kind of stuff. Right. And so it gives using technology to scale personal relationships in authentic ways, because now we're filtering out social media. So you're not dumb scrolling all the time, and you're able to then insert yourself into conversations and start those relational conversations and connection points in meaningful ways. You're using technology to scale personal relationships. We always want to find ways to use technology to scale personal relationships. That's where ministry happens.
So right? Once a week. Yeah. So once a week, you're surfacing these opportunities to a pastor or a team, and you're saying just spend an hour?
So we said 20 minutes. We found out we started with an hour. We said, because that was the promise. Like, I will do this for you. Our team will do this for you, pastor. But you have to promise me on your calendar, you're going to book some time first thing in the morning. And so the email was delivered at 6:30, and then before they get to work, and then they would click through, and we found that it took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to click through and then just find something to
And what was
comment.
the
And
impact?
it was easy to comment because if you are a football fan and it's someone commented about football, it's very easy for you to comment and have that conversation, right? And so those are the types. If you had a birthday, if you had a job loss, well, you wouldn't comment, but it's a ministry opportunity to actually set up a coffee or reach out to them or something like that, right? There's so many things. Yeah.
Or network, add value, help somebody
Yes.
connect with people that are
Yes.
trying to hire. That's a great. So what did that cost the
I don't know how
church?
much Hootsuite costs. It was like $20 a month, and that's where it is where that's seen typically as a $20 line item, $240 a year, versus how
Mm-hmm.
much is that worth of what we just the 20 minutes, that 20 minutes spent is priceless, right? And if you want to be really, like, if you're talking to the executive pastor voice, let's talk about money. If you had your high capacity donors that were scanned and you actually develop those relationships deeper with the high capacity donors, and that you as a pastor start to understand what's in the lives of those high capacity donors and start to understand what's the social emotional needs and what's the missional needs, the identity of them, and that you're able to connect better, you could make a return on investment for that $20 a month, over time. So on a very technical, monetary level, it's a no-brainer. But I think that's the problem. Like, we're not seeing these use cases that shows the upside of ministry. We're only seeing, oh, we don't want to invest in social media. That just is like totally toxic.
Well, it can be, but you're reframing it as kind of the tip of the spear for relationship. This is
It's it's
relationship engagement.
yes.
That's that
And
a
I
service
think
like that
I
is
think this is
allowing
with all
relationship to
technology, and our
be
culture and society is a victim of this. But we have basically taken technology and been passive about it, and let technology use us versus, right. We are the product right now, so technology is using us versus us using technology, right. And so it's one of those things where it's a small philosophical difference, but there's all these people that says, I remember at the very beginning, and there are people still today. I don't want to. I don't want a cell phone. Do you remember the days back in the day when this thing was not a default? I don't want a cell phone because I don't want someone to be able to
right.
contact me 24/7. I'm like, well, don't answer the phone. Put it on do not disturb, right? Like, that's playing victim. That's not using your own agency. You're not using technology. So, like, you need to deconstruct what your current relationship is with whatever that technology is in the technology stack, and think through strategically what is the end goal and work backwards. All smart people have it backwards. All smart people have it backwards, right? Start with the end goal and then reverse engineer with what you have in front of you. How might we get to that end goal with what we're looking at right now?
Yeah. So I mentioned
Yeah.
marketing ops a few minutes ago. For those that don't know, like, I had 3 people on my team that we dedicated to building the tools, in some cases buying the tools, networking them together so that they worked kind of in concert with one another to accomplish our sales objectives. So, my Google Analytics, my CRM, my ad campaigns, all of the, social listening, all of this stuff is working together in a system that I can measure the progress through a sales cycle. Again, this is a for-profit example. Through a sales cycle, and I can see whether or not my sales team, is being effective and taking
Yes.
advantage of leads. Are we driving enough leads? Are we closing them? Like, all that stuff. That's what marketing ops did in our company. That same type of thing is possible in a ministry context, but I've never met anybody that has that role. But I'm wondering, Kenny, have you, in your work with churches and ministries, have you ever defined a tech stack, like a MarTech stack? Like, you mentioned texting, you've mentioned MailChimp, you've mentioned a couple of different tools, virtual assistants. Have you ever just said, here's a playbook. Here's a tech stack that you should install, and this is what it will do for
yes,
you.
we
And
in the church I worked with, we had a rough version of that. There are leaders that are thinking through that way, right? So like Grace Church in Boston, Brian Buford's the executive pastor there, is doing amazing things where they are using marketplace tools for ministry in a tech stack way. For example, they are using webinars, right? In businesses, we use webinars all the time. How many churches do you know that do webinars? Not that many. And so here's a great example of that sales funnel. They're running webinars on some felt need, whether it's personal finance or uh, homeschooling basics or something that the community members want. They run ads to fill up the webinar. They exclude or suppress their own church database. So they're explicitly saying, I don't want any of my own church members to come to it. I want strangers in our zip code to come to it. They do that, get 70 people, I don't know, 80, 100 people, whatever it is, a big number. So it's one to many. And they deliver the webinar. They teach, they deliver value. Now, the average pastor might, at the end of the day, the call to action is come to church. No, they resist that. The call to action of that is to sign up for a seminar. We're about to have a seminar. It's like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. It's short term, smaller than 70 people. So you might have 25 people in that. And so you go through a seminar that goes further down into personal finance or into homeschooling or whatever the topic might be. It's live
and that
seminar.
would be like a
Yes, live
live
seminar. So it's kind of
seminar,
like a
like an
webinar, but
event.
it's more sustained. So you're increasing the frequency of meetings. So it's not a one-off thing; it's a relational thing. And then the call to action from that is not to come to church. Call to action of that is, hey, why don't we go to a book club or a Bible study or some small group experience? And that gets down to 7, 10, a dozen people, right? So you're going from large group to mid-sized to smaller group, all on the same topic, so it has congruence, right? It's expressed an interest in trying to go deeper, and then you're in that small group setting that meets online, and now you have much more deeper relationships with people from the church and from other people. And guess what? The call to action then is there. Now, would you like to come to church? Because there happens to be a sermon series on the same topic. And that's where you can actually get deeper, right? The sermon series explores the biblical worldviews and things like that, and then introduces them to a community that maybe they can explore other tangential things and find other people with that worldview and values. That is using marketplace, funnel, Marcom, tech stack stuff to go down that pathway to nurture them properly, in my view. And again, smart people have it all backwards. Brian's very smart. He starts with a sermon series and plans what would be the good small group experience before that, what would be a good seminar before that, what would be a good webinar before that, and plans it out on the calendar so that it times up well, right? You can't start that process 3 weeks before the sermon series starts. And so they're building out those, in the business world, we call them sales funnels. We would call them funnels, right? And so that's where I think it's important. Google AdWords. You and I both know that Google AdWords has a grant for nonprofits that churches can benefit from. And a lot of churches get the grant. It's $10,000 a month, free advertising on Google, but they burn it on just trying to get people to the church's homepage. And so when we've managed Google grants for churches and ministries, we build landing pages on felt needs higher up on that sales funnel and get them there, engage them higher, because they're discovering the WIFM, the what's in it for me on their side, not me. The church wants you to just come to their church, right? But to serve them, we have to serve them. What is the actual person, the stranger in your zip code? What do they really want? They have some felt need. How do we serve them first, connect the dots, and then bring them down? And so I feel like lead magnets, which is another business term, I feel like we need to record a whole other episode on a glossary of business terms for ministry. But a lead magnet would be appropriate there, right? So if it's homeschooling that someone wants to learn about, well, maybe you create a lead magnet that explain a PDF or a mini video teaching series that goes along the basics of that, and then you bring them down that pathway. So I think lead magnets is something that churches should explore, right? HubSpot, which is it's like a supercharged email system. There was some study that showed businesses that have, I think it was, they counted the number of lead magnets a company has. Once you have 11, there's a jump in the number of people who sign up and come into your database. 30 was the place where it hockey sticks. So, and churches can create resource. That means you just have to create a resource, right? Churches are the ones that have the ability to talk about 30 different issues that affect people in their community. We can create 50 of them. Churches have the applicability of the biblical worldview and the teachings of Jesus can be applied to more than 30 topics in any given life. We have infinite topics that we can talk to. We can create, you and I can sit down and plan out a lead magnet a week for the next 52 weeks. They will be all different, all relevant to people in our zip code. And why aren't churches doing that? So that's one of my calls for this next season of my work, I feel like, is like, how do we help teach churches about taking the best practices of sales funnels that the marketplace uses to engage strangers and bring them in to become raving fans of their brands? How do we apply those principles to ministry so that we get raving fans of Jesus into the mix?
So how do you identify and surface those topics that are most relevant to
Dude,
the
you've
community
got
that
your
you're trying to
biggest
serve?
focus group right in front of you. It's your congregation. You need to talk to your people. Ask them what they're seeing. What are their friends? You're on the sidelines of your kids' soccer team. It's an hour of nonsense when they're little toddlers, right? Like it's magnet ball when you're playing right, kitty soccer, right? It's just one kid and with a ball and 50 kids, the whole team's like, there's nothing to watch, right? And then you're just chatting away with the other parents on the sideline. You pick up on what are the issues that your friends and neighbors that don't go to church, what they're struggling with.
You know what I love about that suggestion is it also, like by default, puts your congregation
Absolutely.
in a partnership mindset. It's like, I want you to think about what people are asking about and talking
It's
about,
almost
and
like when you
how
have
can we
marketing ops, sales enablement. If your sales force is out there on the street selling, they come back to headquarters and says to the marketing support team, I need a webinar on this topic. I need a brochure on this thing because I can sell it. What we do in the churches, forget that. And we just impose on our people to what? Invite your friend to church, invite your friend to church, invite your coworker to church. Just invite. We don't help them. We tell them to do it, but we don't equip them to do it. That's why no one does it. It's so hard and it's awkward. They don't have the skills or the tools. What if we went to you and you came back and said,
well, and you know what happened?
I have a couple that they have issues with discipline at home, or they just went through divorce and they're lonely, right? If they came to you and said, can you help me? What, then you'd be happy to come up with resources to do that. But we just never have that conversation with our own people.
And if people actually, take that step to invite people to church, they're often faced with this question of like, well, why? Why should I go? And if somebody's asking, why should I go? You haven't made a compelling argument, for one, but you haven't shown them any value. Everything that you're talking about is adding value to the people that you're trying to reach. It's like thinking about what is valuable for them. What do they need in their life? What helps them, become just more stable. Like, it doesn't even have to be a faith thing at the beginning. It's like, what needs do you have that I can serve? Like, we are well equipped. I have to get all of those tools, those resources out into people's lives, and enabling your congregation.
This is why I love content marketing, because right now the way that culture has shifted, and We've gone post-Christian in many
Mm-hmm.
communities. Europe has seen that. The authority of the church has been eroded,
Mm-hmm.
right? It used to be that everyone did not question if there is God, if there's Jesus, etc., right? We're still living, though, in a world where we assume people's interest in what we have to offer. So pastors and church leaders assume the interest of the neighbors in what the church offers. And in today's world, we must demonstrate relevance in answering that why question. And the way to do it without having the one-to-one interactions at scale is content marketing. It is digital, right? And so that is where we have technology has democratized access to these tools, where you and I see that as infinitely cheap, and yet the church leader looks at it as another expense item, right? Now you can go out like a church
Mm-hmm.
planter, right? Like and these two audiences never talk to each other. It seems that church pastors of congregations, and church planters look at each other as if they're completely different breeds, and they don't even like different industries. They would never talk to each other, right? And if you look at a church planter, what they have to do is they literally have to strike up one-on-one conversations and demonstrate relevance one-on-one every day. It's a very slow, tedious, laborious process. And yet churches with congregations have the ability to scale that actual same activity because they do have budgets to be able to afford these tools. They have the people to be able to actually operate those tools, and then they can create the content that the congregation can use to disseminate and distribute and have larger distribution and reach. There's so much more advantages that any church leader listening here has today, and yet the limitation is seeing these things as expenses. Sorry, I'm preaching. You gotta like take the
Mm.
mic away from me, Nick.
So no. It's all good. So that leads to my next question perfectly. You've got a detractor. Maybe it's a executive pastor, maybe it's an elder, like how there's
Sure.
a detractor in every one of these camps. Spending too much money, but
Yeah.
well-intentioned. I'm not questioning motivations, but how do you bridge that gap? How do you help that person understand, the value and kind of the strategy that you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I think in my mind it is you need social proof, right? How am I going to convince you to take up golf where you don't see the relevance of it, and you just see, oh, to buy clubs it's expensive, to buy balls and lose them every week it's expensive, like there's all right, like how am I going to demonstrate that? Well, it's social proof that you have to be surrounded with friends that play golf, and that you see that their lives are, they're happy, they're excited, they have camaraderie, they have friends, they have other things, right? Like I think you have to have more case studies
Mm.
written. We need, if there's any big need, I would love to get into. I need to learn how to write grants. I would love funding to be able to just build case studies and shine a spotlight on people like Brian at Grace Church doing amazing things with technology that are easy to execute, and build those playbooks and expose it. Don't gatekeep, share the playbook of how to do those things. And so in the past, that's what we've been doing. Like people make fun of me because I, tongue in cheek, that if there's a summit, Kenny's running it, building it, or planning it, right, like promoting it. Online summits are a cost-effective way, cheaper than going to a conference. Conferences are expensive. You have to buy airplane tickets and meals and hotels and time away. There's so much learning today that's available. YouTube is at our fingertips, right? And so how do we actually um, share? So if you are a leader that's doing anything with tech, the Marcom tech stack, as Nick and I are talking about, I would say my appeal is, how do you share what you're doing with somebody else? Just share. Invite them into that story just to show. I think it's, people see it as bragging sometimes. I had a church leader that I was talking with, like they were doing some amazing stuff. I was like, you need to tell people about it. Like, I don't want to brag about what we're doing over here and people don't really care. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't think it's bragging. I think if you're sharing how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
not just saying, oh, not just beating your chest and saying, oh, we were able to get, 1,000 more people in our doors this month. Instead of saying that, sharing the literally what you're doing and how you're doing it, I think is probably the best thing that you can do to um, help your neighbors, help your kingdom.
We should record another episode because we're at an hour and that flew by. And I know you're busy. If somebody wants to share what they're doing with you, how would they
Um,
get in contact with you?
yeah, I mean, you can find me on the internet. Someone said to me, you're not hiding from anyone out there. So you can Google me at Kenny Jahng. I hang out most recently at churchtechtoday.com. I'm the editor in chief there. You can use the contact form to reach out to me at churchtechtoday.com. I'm available on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Message me. AIforchurchleaders.com is the latest flavor of tech that we are exploring. We've built a community. We're on our way to 6,000 church leaders trading notes. And again, that's the
Wow.
theme. Find a community where you can trade notes with each other, where you can ask questions, where you're not shamed, where you can ask those dumb questions as a beginner and find other people willing to trade their notes and share what they're learning. Find a community. It doesn't have to be those. Find some other community. Start your own community. I think that's just one of those things that's so easy to do. Can you pick up the phone and even call half a dozen other church leaders in your town and say, I'd love to host a lunch or a breakfast? And just the homework assignment is come and share just one thing that's working for you guys. You would be surprised how many people would say yes to that, and then what you would actually learn coming out of it.
Mm-hmm. Really good. Kenny, thanks. Thanks
Anytime.
for spending some time with me today. And I always appreciate the insight. So good.